The air in our house had always carried a quiet tension, the kind you could feel settling into your bones without knowing exactly why. But that evening, it pressed down on me like a leaden blanket. My mom's voice, usually soft and maternal, had a sharp edge I couldn't ignore. "Your sister's struggling. You'll handle it," she said, as if she were announcing a simple chore rather than placing the weight of someone's life in my hands. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth, my appetite lost somewhere in the pit of my stomach. My sister, barely 17, had been teetering on the edge of despair for months, and somehow, in my mother's eyes, it was my responsibility to fix her. I looked across the table, hoping for some flicker of disagreement, some sign that Dad would speak up. But his eyes, dark behind thin, rimmed glasses, were fixed on his plate, silent, approving in a way that made my chest tighten. I wanted to protest, to scream that I wasn't their puppet, that I wasn't some extension of their failed parenting. But the words caught in my throat. I had learned over the years that arguing with my mother was like trying to push against a wall of iron, unyielding, unrelenting, and in the end crushing. And Dad's silence had always been louder than any argument. It wasn't protection, it wasn't neutrality, it was complicity. I chewed mechanically, each bite tasteless, my mind racing. Why me? Why had they decided I was the one to carry the burden, the one to fix what they wouldn't even admit existed? My sister sat across the table, oblivious, scrolling through her phone with that smile she reserved for moments when she wanted the world to think she was fine. My mom glanced at her, a flash of concern, or maybe it was calculation, and then back to me. "You'll understand when you have to step up," she said. Her tone left no room for argument, only submission. I looked at Dad, my heart hammering with a mix of anger and disbelief. He met my gaze briefly, then looked away, returning to his dinner as if nothing had happened. I felt the weight of their expectations settle over me, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to speak, to tell them I wasn't the one who needed to handle everything, that their negligence had consequences, but I didn't. Not yet, not when my own voice felt small and powerless in that room. As I left the table, the familiar ache of betrayal coiling in my chest, I realized something crucial. I didn't have to accept this arrangement, this silence, this manipulation. I could bear the burden for my sister, yes, but I didn't have to carry the guilt, the blame, or the approval of people who had shown me nothing but expectation and judgment. And so, as I retreated to my room, I made a silent promise to myself. One day, they would understand the cost of their indifference. One day, they would see the consequences of treating me as a tool, a fixer, rather than a person. And maybe, just maybe, when that day came, the scales would tilt not in favor of my parents, not yet, but in favor of me. For now, though, all I could do was watch, wait, and begin to plan. The first stirrings of anger were there, simmering beneath the surface, sharp and insistent. I wasn't powerless, not anymore. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog. Every morning, I woke to the quiet hum of the house, the smell of coffee brewing, the faint rustle of my sister's bedroom door as she got ready for school. My mother's words echoed in my mind like a mantra I didn't want to repeat. "Your sister's struggling. You'll handle it." And yet, as much as I resented the responsibility, I couldn't ignore her. I began to watch her more closely, not with the obvious eyes of a sister or a parent, but like a shadow moving alongside her life. I saw the way she avoided the mirror, the way she skipped meals without anyone noticing, the subtle tremor in her hands when she thought no one was looking. She was unraveling, piece by piece, and my parents, as always, remained blind or indifferent. I started small, almost invisibly. I'd leave a note in her notebook, "I'm here." I'd refill her water bottle when she forgot, leave snacks in her bag, or quietly fix the messes no one else noticed. She never thanked me, didn't know who was doing it, but I could see her shoulders relax just a little, in moments I wouldn't have thought mattered. That tiny relief was both a balm and a fuel for the fire burning inside me, because as I tended to her needs, I couldn't ignore the sharp sting of betrayal. My mother, cold and precise, had handed me her suffering as if it were a test I hadn't asked for. My father, silent, had nodded in agreement, silently approving the cruelty of their arrangement. It wasn't just that they expected me to help. It was that they expected me to do it quietly, humbly, and without acknowledgement, as though my love for my sister was a commodity they could exploit. I began to notice patterns in their behavior, subtle ones at first. My mother thrived on appearances, on the illusion that she was the perfect caregiver, the selfless parent. My father hid behind indifference, pretending neutrality while silently reinforcing her control. And in the gaps between them, I existed, the unwilling mediator, the unnoticed shadow. But shadows have power. I started thinking about the ways I could reclaim mine. Every small act of care became a quiet assertion of control. I learned my sister's routines, her weaknesses, her joys, and in doing so, I began to craft a plan, not one of anger, not yet, but of careful strategy. I would not let them manipulate me forever. One day, I would turn their own expectations back on them, not with cruelty, but with precision. In the meantime, I continued my double life. To the world, I was the dutiful sister, the quiet helper. In secret, I collected the pieces of my sister's life, fixing what they broke, protecting her from their negligence. And in that secret, a strange satisfaction began to bloom. It wasn't revenge yet, not in the full sense, but it was the beginning, the simmering undercurrent that would one day erupt. As I lay awake at night, listening to the muffled sounds of the house, I felt a shift inside me. I was no longer just the obedient child, the passive observer. I was a watcher, a planner, a protector, and with that knowledge came something dangerous, something intoxicating. The first true taste of control. I had a quiet strength now, a silent power that they couldn't touch. And one day, I would use it. By the time the plan began to take shape, I had spent months moving in silence, a shadow intertwined with my sister's life and my family's indifference. I knew their habits, their weaknesses, the tiny cracks they believed no one noticed. My mother, with her meticulous control, believed she was untouchable. My father, with his stoic silence, believed he could avoid responsibility simply by sitting still. Both were about to learn just how wrong they were. It started small, almost imperceptibly. A misplaced document here, a subtly misdirected phone call there. Nothing dangerous, nothing overtly cruel, just enough to expose the fragility of their careful facades. My mother's meticulously timed errands began to unravel. She missed appointments double, booked dinners, and subtly, without them realizing it, I had orchestrated the missteps. Dad, usually the unflinching pillar of silence, started to twitch at my interventions, his calm facade cracking under the weight of small but growing chaos. At the same time, I continued caring for my sister. She was beginning to notice the pattern, the little help that appeared as if by magic, the small protections that kept her from completely unraveling. And in her gratitude, in her quiet relief, I found the first sweetness of my revenge, not destruction, but exposure. I wasn't trying to hurt my parents. I was showing them, gently but firmly, that their neglect had consequences, that their silence was not harmless. The first confrontation came unexpectedly. My mother, flustered over a cancelled meeting she had blamed on someone else's incompetence, stormed into my room, accusing me of negligence in areas I hadn't touched. I let her speak, my face calm, my tone measured. And then, like a mirror held to her own behavior, I recounted every misstep she had made, the forgotten errands, the ignored warnings, the manipulations disguised as concern. Every word cut gently but decisively, leaving her without the comfort of denial. Dad's reaction was slower, more insidious. At first, he dismissed my words with a faint smile, the same polite neutrality he had used for years. But as I presented facts he couldn't ignore, dates, forgotten promises, subtle mismanagement that only I had noticed, his silence became uneasy. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I simply revealed quietly, carefully, that their inaction had a cost, and that the child they had underestimated had been quietly taking notes all along. And my sister, the silent observer for so long, began to understand. She saw what I had done not to harm, but to reclaim dignity, both for her and for myself. Her eyes, wide with recognition and gratitude, became the truest reward. The bond between us deepened, fortified by shared struggle and quiet triumph. It was sweet because it was measured, subtle, and precise. There was no vengeance in anger, only in the careful unveiling of truth. They had treated me as a tool, a quiet force to manage the chaos they ignored. Now they were forced to see me as I was, strong, capable, and unwilling to be manipulated. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the muffled sounds of my parents arguing over mistakes I had orchestrated, I felt an unfamiliar warmth of satisfaction. The scales had begun to tip. For the first time, they were the ones scrambling while I watched in quiet triumph. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was shaping the world around me, quietly, cleverly, with love for the sister who had needed me, and a precise, unspoken sting for the parents who had failed us both. The days after the confrontation were quiet, but the silence was different now. It wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was weighted with awareness. My mother moved through the house with a tentative caution I hadn't seen before, as if every action might be observed, every decision quietly judged. My father, too, had shifted. His usual calm, indifferent demeanor was replaced by a subtle tension, a recognition that his silence no longer shielded him. I continued my careful routine with my sister, helping her navigate school, friendships, and the fragile corridors of her own emotions. But the difference was palpable. She began to rely on me openly, not secretly. She started talking, really talking, about her fears and doubts, and I listened without judgment, without the bitterness that had built up over the years. In the quiet of those conversations, we began to rebuild what had been fractured, not just between us, but within ourselves. It was strange, this feeling of power tempered by love. I could see the consequences of my actions reflected in my parents' faces, but I did not gloat. There was no joy in humiliation. The satisfaction came from justice and clarity. My mother, who had always measured affection and control, had to face the fact that love could not be demanded. It had to be earned and recognized. My father, who had preferred silence over accountability, learned that observation without action was complicity. There were moments when resentment still bubbled beneath the surface. Old habits die slowly, and the scars of betrayal are not erased by a single act. But the sting was tempered by growth. I had transformed my anger into a tool, not a weapon. I had taken their expectations and twisted them not to hurt, but to illuminate, to reclaim agency in a household that had never given it freely. One evening, as my sister and I sat side by side on the couch, laughing quietly at a shared memory from our childhood, I realized the depth of what had changed. The bond between us was no longer one-sided. It was mutual, fortified by struggle and solidarity. She turned to me with a soft, almost shy smile, and said, "I don't know how you always see me, even when no one else does." Her words struck me with a profound clarity. All the planning, all the careful maneuvers had been for this, to protect her, to reclaim my own strength, and to finally assert that love, when intertwined with care and courage, could outlast manipulation and neglect. The final confrontation with my parents was understated but definitive. No shouting, no dramatic declarations, just quiet acknowledgement. My mother, for the first time, admitted that she had relied on me unfairly. My father softly acknowledged that his silence had been a failure. I listened, accepted the words, and let them settle without resentment. There was no need for triumph, only recognition, and a subtle, unspoken victory. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of peace. Not the naive peace of ignoring betrayal, but the earned serenity of someone who had faced injustice, acted with intention, and emerged stronger. I had carried the burden for my sister, yes, but in doing so, I had discovered my own power. The house was quieter now, but it was ours, my sister's and mine. And in that quiet, I understood something essential. Love and loyalty, even when tested by indifference, can transform pain into strength. I had learned not just to survive, but to thrive, to wield care as a shield and subtle justice as a sword. And in that balance, I found my freedom,